94 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Before I begin, I'd like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the tables for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Only use a black approved earpiece. Please keep your earpiece away from the microphone at all times, and when you're not using your earpiece, put it face down, please, on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Thank you all for your cooperation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of members. So we don't have anyone on Zoom right now, so that's a rare treat, so that's great. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. So I would like to welcome MP Dreschen to our committee. I guess you're filling in today, so thank you for joining us.
MPF is also filling in.
Oh, right. Dave from Brantford, right? From Brantford, Brant?
I am Chatham Kennedy.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Far south in Canada.
Southwestern Ontario.
Yes,
the heart of the country. Thank you for joining us. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, May the 23rd, 2024, the committee commences its study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. It's now my pleasure to welcome from the Department of the Environment, Danny Drouin, Director General, Plastics and Waste Management Directorate, and Thomas Kreidenier, Executive Director, Substance Prioritization, Assessment, and Coordination Division. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Mr. Drouin, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Est-ce qu'on m'entend bien? Oui.
Can you hear me?
Everyone, thank you for the invitation to appear before you to discuss innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. As the chair said, my name is Danny Drouin, and I'm from the Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm joined by my colleague, Thomas Kreidenier, Executive Director of Substance Prioritization, Assessment, and Coordination Division, also at Environment and Climate Change Canada. We're pleased to be here as part of your study, and we appreciate the committee's interest in this issue. Les preuves sont claires.
The evidence is clear. Plastic pollution is everywhere and harms wildlife and habitats.
Health Canada published a science assessment of plastic pollution in 2020. This report underscores that plastic pollution poses a significant threat to terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. La science émergente continue de montrer.
Emerging science continues to show that people are exposed to microplastics through air, water, soil, and even the food they eat.
The majority of countries' plastics waste follows a very linear fashion where we manufacture, use, and dispose mostly in landfills plastics. This valuable resource is not managed sustainably. It leads to economic losses and plastics pollution. So action is needed to improve the management of plastic waste and improve the circularity of plastics in Canada. Recycling alone will not solve this problem. Pour lutter contre la pollution plastique,
Tackling plastic pollution requires a comprehensive life cycle approach to preventing and reducing plastic waste.
Government is implementing an ambitious and comprehensive plan to reduce plastic waste and pollution and move towards a circular plastics economy through a range of complementary action across the life cycle of plastics. The agenda is grounded in strong foundation of science and evidence. The government advances Canada's plastic science agenda by conducting and investing in science, including working to harmonize scientific methods, further detecting and characterizing plastic pollution, as well as assessing socioeconomic, environmental, and potential health impacts. To further build the knowledge base, the government announced the creation of the Federal Plastics Registry a few weeks ago. The registry will require producers to report annually on the quantity and types of plastics they place on the Canadian market, as well as how these plastics are managed at the end of their life. This information, along with the annual reporting by Statistics Canada, will play a critical role in collecting data, monitoring progress, identifying gaps and area for further action, as well as communicating to and with Canadians. The plan also recognizes the importance of advancing solutions in key sectors. Important work has been completed in sectors such as packaging, agriculture, automotive, construction, healthcare sectors, and investments are also supporting research innovation in the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector, restaurants, beverage, as well as textile and apparel sectors. The government is also supporting the advancements of innovation in key areas that are important for businesses and stakeholders. This work focuses on advancing reuse innovation to replace single-use plastics and improving the collection and sorting of plastics, film, and flexible packaging. In addition, Canada works collaboratively with provinces and territories through the Council of Ministers of the Environment to support the advancement of comprehensive extended producer responsibility programs and develop guidance intended to improve consistency across Canada. Important progress is made. It is expected by 2027, over 90% of Canadians will live in jurisdictions with an EPR program in place for plastic packaging. This is one important tool that helps make producers responsible for the plastic waste that their products generate. Bien que nous travaillons avec diligence,
Although we are working diligently to implement initiatives and engage national partners, plastic pollution does not respect international borders. It is a global problem that requires urgent global action.
continues to
It's the time for your opening statement, but I'm sure some of the comments you would have made we'll get to with our questions. Thank you so much. Thank you for the remarks, and now I'm going to open the floor to questions. Be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. We'll begin our first round with MP Tucker for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Start off a couple of technical questions before we get bulk of my work here today. Can you please explain to the committee the key differences between something that is biodegradable and something that can break down through an industrial process?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. It's an important one. The science shows that biodegradable products can break down and biodegrade in very specific conditions. Temperature, humidity, and those conditions are usually in an industrial setting. The problem that the literature shows and the research is that when those biodegradable products end up in the environment, especially in Canadian environment, they behave the same way than a normal.
What about the actual processes, though? What are the differences and the challenges that come with those two?
Can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
So what is the difference between the biodegradable and something that can break down through industrial process, like a chemical recycling?
So
there's challenges in each one, correct?
Yes, correct.
And having I guess that would be the latter would make the rest of the waste stream clog up because it's processed differently, correct?
So there's multiple questions in your question, so I'll try to answer them clearly. So first, when you refer to chemical recycling, there's multiple technologies that aims to break down the plastics. So from the polymer to the monomer, the individual resin, and then you can reintroduce this into a new product. So that is a process that is not called biodegradable, but it's chemical recycling.
We're going to have to probably get some written responses on some other questions
Okay.
because I'm going to run out of time. Sorry. From a technical perspective, can you distinguish between virgin resin and chemical depolymerization from a building blocks perspective?
I mean, I can provide you the details on the specific technology you referred to. When we talk about virgin resin, it's the extraction of the use of natural gas or other material that will create the new plastic resin that then is a building block to build any products in plastic. The depolymerization, I'll be able to give you a detailed response in writing as you kind of.
All right. And what efforts is the government advancing to support chemical recycling?
So chemical recycling is a technology that, in the context of a Canadian environment, will likely be needed because mechanical recycling alone will most likely not provide all of the capacity that is needed. So the industry is investing heavily in multiple technologies, and the federal government has supported either like science research or some circumstances the technology itself. Colleagues at Innovation Solution and Economic Development through their funding program would have a specific example where the government has invested in the technology to support the early advancement of the technology.
Along those lines, why aren't we looking to adopt standards like those in the ASTM, which is the American Society for Testing and Materials? Can you explain why we wouldn't want to have these established standards that are linked to our largest trading partners?
I mean, in general, when we look at any control measures or regulations in order to set up performance requirements, standards are usually something that is easy to incorporate in those control measures. So what they do allow is a clear understanding from the stakeholders, the businesses, of which standards apply to a control measure in order to demonstrate a performance.
Why wouldn't we want the same standards as our largest trading partner?
So usually in all our regulatory work, the harmonization with other jurisdictions, largest trading partners, but also sometimes those who are in advance, like the leaders across the world, or they are key input into our regulatory development. So because it leads to harmonization between countries.
Thank
And
you. If there's something quick you want him to
Yes,
send?
just on a written response, what would happen to the cost of living if we didn't have the same standardization as the states? Would it increase or decrease our price of living on any object? And that could be in written form.
Yes, you can send that in written form. Thank you so much. So now we will turn to MP Callaway for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, colleagues and witnesses. Thanks for coming today. I'm a bit of a newbie to this committee. I usually deal with fish and marine life, but I find this a very fascinating study from a whole host of perspectives. So I'm going to focus on about 3 questions, and if we have time, Mr. Duran, maybe you can finish your opening statement with that time, if we do. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate on how Canada's policies on the recycling of plastics has evolved in Canada over the last 10 to 15 years. So what I'm getting at, I suppose, is are we in a better position today to deal with plastics and waste management? That'd be number 1. In your opening statement, you talked about the circular plastics economy. And I'm wondering for us, for me at least, but for people watching at home, what do you mean by that? Like, well, can you unpack the circular plastics economy? That's the second question. And the third question is of getting plastics out of landfills. You know, we often talk about the environmental importance of that, which obviously we should. But I'm wondering if you could speak to the health benefits of doing that, and also the socioeconomic possibilities of doing that. What results as a result of that may tie into your circular plastics economy definition. But over to you, and if you have enough time, you can finish off your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's a lot of plastics in oceans, and fisheries stocks are being impacted. So you're not far from the issue when you're in the other committee. We are in a better place than we were 10, 20 years ago in Canada because of both the policies and the technologies used to sort and recycle. So we're in the better place. We're still far off from a full circular plastic economy with only 8-9% of our plastics being recycled and about 40,000 tons of plastics leaked permanently in the environment each year. So we're far off, but we're in a better place we were. And when I talked about a circular economy in a sense recognize that the value of the products is so important that you need to keep it in the environment, in the economy as long as possible through the reuse, the refineries, the repair of the product, the refurbishing, and then when you come at the real end of life, the recycling puts back the resource in the economy. So that's what we mean by a circular economy is you try to avoid the end of life. And that's linked to the socio-economic that you were talking about. I will thank you for allowing me to finish the introductory remark, if it's okay.
And if I ask you one more question?
Yes, of course.
Because you talked about marine litter.
Yep.
And obviously important in the Great Lakes and the West Coast, the East Coast, the Arctic. Can you just very briefly, because you do have a bit of time here, but can you kind of highlight for me, just the landscape of where we were and where we are? I'm guessing it's similar to what you mentioned in your first answer to my question in terms of we're doing better, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, correct. I mean, you find plastics in Canadian environment everywhere, every shores, every parks, every in the Arctic. You find it in the water. It is worsening in some ways because the influx of pollution is greater than the progress towards the circular economy I was referring to. And so that has important implication for birds and animals and ecosystems.
So the trend line would be a little bit, when it comes to marine, a little different than, say, on land.
Not necessarily. It's worsening. What I was saying at the beginning is the recycling is better than it was 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. The problem is we produce more and more plastics that end up in the environment. That is somehow a bit different than the recycling of plastic, which is improving because of technologies and EPR in provinces and territories.
Okay, I'm a man of my word. I'm a man of my word. I want to make sure you finish your statement.
No, but your point is exactly why the international community is working together to develop this international treaty, to develop a legally binding treaty. And we hosted in Ottawa not long ago the fourth session. The treaty is supposed to be concluded or agreed in 2025. There's still a lot of work to do, but the aim is to level the playing field across the world.
Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Did you want to finish your statement? You have 43 seconds left.
I finished it.
Oh,
I think we're okay.
Well, that's
Very,
wonderful.
very clever.
There we go.
It was within the answers. Very good. Thank you.
So we now will turn to MP Beauchamp-Jacques for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui. Monsieur Drouin.
Thank you. Welcome to the witnesses. Mr. Drouin, I looked at the report published in 2019-2020, and it says that Canada imported 7.1 billion tons of plastics, which is an increase. It represented one third of those plastics were for wrapping goods. 1/6 of this was recycled, but the data doesn't show us which quantity was actually recycled and which quantity ended up in a landfill. And a study showed us that less than 1/10 of plastic waste in Canada is actually recycled. So 1/10, that's very low. What has Canada done to counter this problem? Thank you for the question. You refer to a report analyzing plastics in the Canadian economy. The report was the basis of beginning to understand the problem and finding solutions that we have been discussing with provinces and territories. So the figures that you have are the same figures that I evoked earlier. Mr. Drouin, I really do like figures, but I prefer action. What has your department done to work against this terrible situation? Well, various things. First of all, the Canadian government has invested in science and in data to confirm the figures that you mentioned. We will also be collecting additional data thanks to the registry that was recently created, which will allow us to have more concrete measures in place. There are also regulations that were put into place. There was a ban on 6 single-use plastics, which is in addition to 140 other bans across the world. There are also other regulations on recycled content, labeling, and since 2021, we've also been looking at exporting plastic waste, which now requires a permit. And the permit is only eligible if the country receiving the export wants to receive that. Now that's, thank you. Would you say that your objective of reaching zero plastic waste in 2030 will be possible? That is a shared objective that is part of the Canadian strategy. It is a goal that the provinces and territories are working towards together. And it is not just a federal target. Thank you. So when it comes to the objectives of the federal department, if you were to grade your performance out of 10, would you say that you're attaining your objectives? Well, if we look at our objectives on a pan-Canadian scale at the CCME, we can point to what I already discussed. There's also the ghost fishing equipment, which has been removed from the ocean. When you talk about where we are in terms of our 2030 objectives, I would say a few things. First of all, we have made some progress. The single-use plastic regulation will lead to a reduction of 3% of pollution, 5% of waste. So there is an improvement there. But we do need additional measures. Mr. Drouin, what I don't understand is that a report from February 2024 talks about the fact that Environment Canada started to put into place certain measures to attain the 0% objective for 2030, but had not collected all of the necessary data and had not established all of the surveillance mechanisms necessary to achieve the target. So unless that is done, the government will not attain its targets. So, Mr. Drouin, if I can't measure my progress, then how can I determine that things are going well? You've said that there has been some improvement, but how is it possible to state that if you haven't put into place all the necessary mechanisms to measure improvement? we do agree with the recommendations that were in the report and the fact that we need more detail. So there are some things that are already in place. For example, we announced the Federal Registry on Plastics. That is something that the Commissioner noted as a positive step. The annual report by Statistics Canada also provides information. And there's also a tool which is a partial assessment, which will provide information.
Malheureusement,
C'est
je
next
vais
round.
prendre une réponse écrite, Madame la Présidente.
Pardon? Okay. Okay. So we'll now turn to MP Cannings for his 6-minute round.
Well, thank you to the witnesses for being here with us today. You know, I meet with the plastics industry once a year, I would imagine, for the last, 6, 7 years. And I remember before the new Environmental Protection Act came into place, they were very concerned about the measures around plastics. And they said, we don't need this. You know, we can set up this circular environment where plastics will be recycled and reused, etc. And yet I'm looking at a paper here, Canada's Zero Plastics Packaging Waste Report Card, that came out last fall. It was submitted to Environmental Defense, and it's pretty depressing. It sounds, you know, when we look at the 2030, you know, looking out to 2030, and I think Monsieur Blanchet-Joncar mentioned some of these numbers. If we just keep on doing what we're doing, even with the improvements you talk about, we will be still throwing out 2 million tons of plastics every year in Canada. It's about 88% of the plastics used in Canada will be literally thrown away. You mentioned cooperation with the provinces. You mentioned extended producer responsibility, what the industry is doing. You know, how's that going? Let's start with the industry. What role do you think the industry should be playing here? I think British Columbia has some EPR regulations and a system in place. How are the rest of the provinces doing in that regard?
Thanks for the question. EPR is being rolled out across the country. British Columbia is the more mature system in place, but Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, Yukon, the Atlantic province, so quite a lot of development on EPR, which essentially is about transferring the responsibility and the cost of managing the end of life of the product from the communities to the private sector. Expansion of the EPR programs across the country is happening. There's two gaps. There's one is a gap in terms of harmonization. They are not looking the same across. So for the industry, it makes it more difficult for them to comply with different sets of system, and that's what we're working on with the CCME. One point is there. The other one is a geographic gap in terms of sometimes the type of products covered. So the industry has an important role to play, and it is they do control important levers that will make plastics easy to manage, and they are recognizing it through, for example, the Canada Plastics Pact. In terms of reducing the complexity of the plastics packaging, so it can then it's easier to recycle. Sometimes they're multi-layered. There's a lot of additives, and that makes them very hard to recycle. But the report, which my colleague from Environmental Defense will be able to speak more, it really shows that voluntary actions alone is not going to be working, and there's a need for jurisdictions to mandate some requirements.
Yeah, and I noticed that too. I'm from British Columbia. I end up filling my suitcase half with plastics when I go home here from Ottawa, because I can recycle it at home and I can't recycle it here. But even when I'm recycling at home, I kind of wonder, what, in British Columbia, we seem to have a good plastics recycling thing. A lot of it's voluntary, but they try to make it as easy as possible. And yet I kind of wonder how much of that is being recycled. You hear about all sorts of horror stories about recycling going to landfills. How is that system working there? How could we improve it, that whole recycling ecosystem?
I mean, the landfilling is a real issue because it's an economic loss that is happening at large scale. The pollution is important. The federation works that there's a shared jurisdiction, so municipalities operate the landfills. On top of that, the provinces and territories legislate the EPRs and the operations, and then the federal government has some role into, or is sometimes best placed to, for example, set recycled content mandates, which is an incentive to recycle more, and that will drive investment in the recycling facility. What is currently happening has a lot of promises in terms of the extended producer responsibility programs, and jurisdictions are learning from each other as well. And BC, as I mentioned, being one of the more mature system, is a key contributor. Quebec is launching a new plan. So learning from that and looking at ways to make it easier for industry to comply with not a patchwork of systems in place is something that could be very useful for the country.
And
I guess you'll need to say that for your next round. Thank you very much. So now, starting with the second round, we'll begin with MP Tucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Is the problem with plastic, or is it with how consumers are utilizing the plastic?
So it is somewhat unfair to put the problem on the shoulder of Canadians when, for example, it's very hard to understand what I buy and what can I do with this. Should it go in the garbage? Should it go into the recycle bin? Can be
But
reused.
just stop there for a moment. Like, if it goes in the garbage bin or the recycling bin, if plastic ultimately ends up right now in those two bins, they're not the ones that are causing problems in the environment, correct?
So there's leakages across the recycling stream or the waste stream. So when you put something in your blue box, there's going to be wind and water, and so some of the bags, for example, will fall off from the truck. There'll be other linkages as well. And then when you get into the recycling facility, there's a lot of plastics around the recycling facilities because the bales are being kind of washed out by rain or wind. So at the end of the day,
Sure, but we can get back to it. But isn't that just we need better policies on transportation of the waste and handling at the waste sites? Then wouldn't that fix the problem versus banning?
so the transportation is one problem, but then there's a lack of sorting in the recycling facilities that end up something that you could have put in your blue bin that gets to that point, which they have trouble to sort, to separate where it should go, then it goes to landfill. So the big problem...
What's the problem if it ends up in the landfill, though? As much as I want to recycle that molecule as many times as possible, but the examples you said about plastics in the environment, from the transportation and the processing facilities that do it, it seems like it just needs better quality control, and we wouldn't have the problem then. Wouldn't that be a more common sense approach versus trying to change the whole system of plastics?
The root of the issue that I think you're after is the economic value of this material. Higher the value is, more incentives for the industry to recycle it. And that's the purpose of the EPR program and the recycled content mandates, which will give more economic value to the recycled resin. So that is the most issue, the biggest issue we do face in the plastic economy. When plastics get into a landfill, in 2019 it was an economic loss of $8 billion alone. So there's a lot of opportunity in taking that $8 billion and making it back in the economy. And there's also pollution coming in landfills as well. You see birds and animals that will go into landfills and they can choke, if I can say, by ingesting pieces of plastics as examples.
It appears that processes can be improved and that there's ways of minimizing the leakage into the environment. No one wants to see plastics out there. How did you come up with the 40,000 tons of plastics that are in the environment every year?
Yeah, so this is from what the 40,000 is an estimation of what is not recycled, what doesn't go into the landfill, and then the residual that is being validated.
But without everything in the landfill, there's no way of knowing that that's accurate, because another concerning statement that, for me at least, is you said that there's plastics everywhere, that everywhere you look in Canada there's plastics, and that's not the case. If you want to see plastic pollution, if there's pictures on the internet of oceans and blobs of plastic, which is a problem, that is plastic that is a problem, versus I don't see plastic in our environment everywhere you look. And it kind of casts doubt on the 40,000 tons number, because I don't think everyone who goes to the beach this weekend is going to see plastics littered everywhere. It is a problem, and we should be addressing those problems. I think that there's some issues with municipalities deciding to remove garbage cans, recycling facility, or depots throughout the country, which is causing people to litter or not have another solution. So I know my time is almost up. I am very encouraged with some of the testimony that I heard today. I think we should be working towards making Canada a superpower of plastics recycling. And to your point, there's a lot of value still in the material that we're putting in the ground. Just one last class on the plastics in the ocean. The majority is ghost gear, correct?
There's also a lot of microplastics.
But the majority of the weight. That's what there's different studies out there.
Maybe a written answer, because we're quite a bit over now on that. Okay, so a written answer would be great. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. So we'll now turn to MP Jazik for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Monsieur Drouin. You have alluded, obviously, to the federal government's responsibilities in terms of collecting data and advancing solutions. And so when we look at some of the Stats Canada data that is collected on, I presume, a national level in terms of the percentage of plastics that is going to landfill and not being recovered in any way, do you actually break that down? As we've already heard, there are so many jurisdictions involved, provinces, territories, regional municipalities, where I come from in the region of York, local municipal collection. Do you break it right down to the municipality that is responsible for the actual recycling of these plastics? And do you report that back in any fashion directly to those municipalities?
So I will have to get back to you on the breakdown to municipalities. There is, however, a breakdown to provinces and territories, because we do also communicate back the information to them, because it's essential for their own policies and how they establish them and monitor them. So we do have that level of sharing of information.
Well, I think that would be very valuable, because how can people improve if they don't, on the ground, understand what's happening in their local area? And just as many people have said, I think consumers are very responsible of putting stuff in their blue boxes, but then it disappears. So again, on extended producer responsibility, you've said that obviously there is an economic issue here, that essentially money is being lost because it's just the product is going into landfill. So I understand if the producer has some ability to collect the waste themselves, but it doesn't work that way. It goes to the municipal landfill. So how do you in any way calculate the dollar value that that the producer needs to provide to offset the cost to the municipality for the recycling? I just don't understand how you would calculate the dollar value.
Yeah. If you look at any given EPR legislation, let's say, for example, in Ontario or in BC, for each category of products that it covered, whether it's a packaging, whether it's a TV, there is a fee that is associated to that product that the province sets themselves, whether it is sometimes by weight, sometimes it's by unit. So one TV would equal a fee of, and that is how the fees and the cost for the EPR programs are set up to offset the municipal operations. In many cases, what we see in Canada is the industry will regroup themselves as a group, a producers' responsibility organization, and sometimes they will sometimes they can almost like operate the facilities in a particular municipality, and some other times the municipality keeps to operate it and then collect the fees from the producer's responsibility. So there's few ways that it's being done in Canada, at least.
Are there any penalties that you're aware of if a producer refuses to participate?
I would have to get back to you, but I would think that every provinces and territorial legislation on EPR do have consequences for non-compliance.
Well, it just strikes me that it would need an army of people inspecting facilities, counting the number of TVs being deposited. It seems like an extraordinarily bureaucratic kind of exercise. Could you relieve me of this apprehension?
So this is a bit of the purpose of the Federal Plastics Registry that was launched recently, is to
Answer, please. Quick answer, please.
It is a mandatory reporting that is meant to be transparent and available to authorities as well as the public.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we'll turn to MP Blanchard-Jonca for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je poursuis avec Monsieur Drouin. Monsieur Drouin, vous avez parlé de l'importance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Drouin, you talked about this new plastic registry, but the EU created a similar registry in 2018, Japan in 2021, Australia also has one, so we're 3 to 5 years behind. Would you say that there's a lack of vision here or a lack of political courage? I think I'll let you answer that specific question, but I can say that at the federal level, we realized that there were a few provincial registries, but there was no harmonization, and the entire country was not covered in the same way. And so that's why this is what led to the creation of a federal registry. Mr. Drouin, you're the expert. You advise the government on public policy to fix problems. You say that in your report that there's a threat to ecosystems, that 1/10 of plastics in Canada are recycled. Now I've named countries that are 3 to 5 years ahead of us. So what did you advise the government to do? You have the internet at your department, so you know what's going on elsewhere. What was part of our advice to government as part of a process that we are engaged in with a perspective, but there are also other perspectives out there. Mr. Drouin, at what time did you advise the government to set up a plastics registry for the first time? Well, in fact, for this type of question, I would say that I'm bound by a code of conduct when it comes to the internal processes. But what I can tell you is that in 2018, the FPT departments got together and decided that we needed a plastics strategy. Mr. Drouin, I'd like you to answer because this is a question of transparency for the public who pays your salary. If this is such important advice, why can't the public be aware of these facts? Well, in the process of policy making, the department regularly provides advice to government. This is based on science. Thank you.
So now we'll turn to MP Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Now, there's kind of a mantra in the recycling space about it's not just recycling. More important, perhaps, is to reduce the use and manufacture of these items, to reuse them where possible, and then, if necessary, to recycle the rest. Is there anything in your overall strategy that sets out targets for those three streams? Is that something that
there's actions across the waste hierarchy, which is what you've outlined, reduction, and but the targets are set by provinces for those. But the federal government does invest in public awareness to incentivize reduction, reuse, and public media campaign, public education. We also support sectors in the economy so they can look at reuse and refinery. For example, there's groceries that are currently testing pilots to allow you to go to bring your what you buy in the grocery in a reusable container, so you can go back. So that all go back and refill it. That all have impact on the reduction of plastics for sure.
I guess, and quickly, you mentioned targets. How are we for setting targets? I mean, we can't get anywhere if we don't set targets, but it seems that very few provinces have set real targets for this. And I'm just wondering, where are we in getting somewhere by 2030 if we don't set targets?
Yeah, so the targets for the recycling are being set by the provinces. And everywhere where there's an APR legislation, there'll be targets for the collection and recycling of the materials covered. As I mentioned, we will need more measures across the country to get to zero plastic waste by 2030. That is a fact.
Because, according to this report, it seems that British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec are the only provinces that are anywhere near setting enough targets. And what can the federal government do to encourage the rest of the provinces to get behind this?
Thank you. So that's our time, but if you would like to submit that in writing, I think we'd all probably like to see that. So we're going to go 2.5 and 2.5 for a third round. So we'll start with the MP Lob, and then that'll be it for this panel.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. You'd mentioned the registry, the plastics registry. I was just curious, is there an estimation how much that's going to cost to operate the plastics registry on an annual basis?
The registry is being built currently. The IMIT platform is currently being built, so I don't have the cost of that registry currently.
Is there a risk there could be duplication between what the province is doing versus what you're doing, and how are you preventing that duplication?
Yeah, thanks. That's an excellent question. Where we have had discussions with the provinces that do have registries in place, and there's two ways that we have looked at to reduce that potential of duplication. One was to as much as possible, follow the CCME guidance that we have collectively. So we're first
Fair enough.
harmonized.
I'm going to run out of time. So you're working on. Last question is, Amazon, Canadian Tire, Walmart, all these companies, they bring stuff from China. It's wrapped in cardboard, packaged in styrofoam. There's plastic all over it. At what point do you bring them in for a conversation to be part of this and to say, you guys have to stop. If you're going to keep bringing this stuff in, you have to start meeting some targets to reduce what's on your shelves and the packaging that it's brought in. Where's that at?
Yeah. Another way that we've reduced duplication is to allow for bulk uploading from a provincial registry to the federal registry to reduce the administrative burden. The marketplace, the e-commerce are covered by the plastics registry, so they will need to report on the amount of plastics they put on the market.
Have you had talks with companies like Amazon and Canadian Tire and Walmart and these companies that export everything on what their numbers look like? Do you know what their numbers are currently for plastic?
I mean, this is what the registry will give us, because that will be their own data.
Because I know I go to the dump and I do dump runs, and I'll tell you, when you go and look there, it's plastic chairs, it's plastic toys, it's all the, I won't call it junk, but all the stuff you see on the shelves in the spring is what ends up in the landfill in the fall. And that's just a reality.
Thank you very much. So now we'll wrap up this round with MP Diab for
Thank you,
2.5
Madam
minutes.
Chair. Let's just continue on that theme for a moment. The CCME, the Council of Ministers, FPTs in 2018, as you, I think, talked about, did set the priority for the plastic waste management, and I think you talked about the remanufacture, refurbish, recycle, ending, you know. So the Federal Plastics Registry, what information can the government draw from that, establishing it, and how can it contribute to the goals of the strategy on zero plastic waste?
So the granularity of the registry will be very useful in the context of understanding from the life cycle of any product the amount, the type of plastics that is put on the market, and what happens at the end of its life. In of itself, that data will be extremely important to identify gaps in measures, whether federally or provincially as well. That information will be available to the public as well, and the industry. So, for example, the industry is looking at the registry to give them more granular data in perhaps finding ways to better manufacture and design the plastics, which right now they might be doing it because they've done it like this for decades. But they say through the registry they might find ways to reduce the complexity of plastics. So that's the type of information.
Say that could promote some innovation here, innovation and research in...
Innovation, research, and with innovations come investments, yes.
And how would the federal government work with the PTs, provinces and territories in this?
In the registry or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it sharing? Is it simply sharing of information?
Yes. So, for example, one important opportunity for the province will be to look at the federal registry data and compare them with their own data and see if there are discrepancies. And then they can then perhaps look at additional measures on their end as well.
Good. Thank you very much. And I just wondered, how does Nova Scotia fit in all of this? I'm a Nova Scotian MP.
Yes. Nova Scotia is, like many Atlantic provinces, the issue is close to their home, so extremely collaborative, positive in the conversation, and already have plastics ban, for example. So I would say quite
we're pretty advanced, are we?
Yes.
Thank you.
Being the witness.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to both of our witnesses. That wraps up this round. So we do appreciate Danny Druin and Thomas Cryendier for your testimonies this morning and participation. So you may submit the additional comments that you didn't get a chance to finish through the clerk. And we're going to suspend briefly now to do a sound check with the witness on our second panel. to order. So we had a little initial problem with the sound check there, but I think we've got our witness all ready to go. So we want to welcome Karen Wierzik, Senior Program Manager of Plastics. So at the bottom of your screen, Ms. Wierzik, you've got the option of translation, floor, English or French. And those of you in the room, you're well familiar with the process here. So we will now start. We will give you up to 5 minutes, Ms. Wierzik, for your opening remarks, at which point then we'll start with our round of questions. You may begin.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me today. Success in plastics recycling has proven elusive even after more than 40 years of promises to improve it. And while the role of science in addressing plastic pollution is crucial, I caution against focusing that scientific and research effort on recycling. The latest Statistics Canada data indicates that approximately 8% of more than 4 million tons of plastics discarded each year in Canada are recycled. The needle has not actually moved in 40 years, and it's not for lack of trying. The problem lies not in recycling itself, but in the proliferation of material types and uses of plastic that make it extremely difficult to collect, sort, and process in any safe, effective, and economical way. As a result, we see troubling levels of plastic waste leakage, concerning especially because of the threat this leaked plastic proposes to ecosystems and wildlife. And because once in the environment, this plastic never really goes away. Plastic is a persistent and bioaccumulative pollutant. And while improvements to product design, collection, sorting, and processing could reduce this post-use leakage, it is highly unlikely to make a significant dent in the amount of plastics in the environment. This is true especially if plastic production and use continue to grow at the pace at which they are growing today, which is much faster than the rate of GDP growth, for example. At this rate, we will be running in place even if recycling improves. What's more, plastic, or more specifically microplastics, are being found in every part of the human body, including lungs, blood, brain, testicles, and placenta. While scientific research is still in development on the main pathways and impacts of this extremely pervasive plastic poisoning, we know enough to know that our bodies are collectively being used as the world's biggest laboratory, and that we should certainly proceed with every caution when it comes to addressing plastic production, use, recycling, and disposal. We know that microplastics in our body are more likely related to the use phase of plastics than the disposal phase. Plastic is in the air, water, household dust, and food we eat, which migrates from packaging and products as we use them. And so recycling is also not going to address the urgent issue of protecting human health from plastics. The same is true for so-called bio-based, biodegradable, or compostable plastics. They all contain unknown chemical additives, and recent research has shown they all act quite the same as conventional when leaked into the environment. So how did we get here? One of the main drivers of plastic pollution is profit-motivated chemistry that has largely shown disregard for the public interest, even if it has produced some applications that have an undeniable social utility. Everything you can imagine is made out of plastic, as well as a huge number of things you never imagined and probably don't need. What's more, this plastic is a chemical soup of substances that are largely unidentified and unstudied from a safety point of view. Earlier this year, researchers identified 16,000 chemicals used in plastics. Of those, only 4,200 have been identified as hazards, while a whopping 10,000 have no hazard information at all. This is because profit-motivated chemistry does not readily make their formulations known, even to regulators and researchers. The study I referenced also found that more than 400 chemicals of concern can be found in each plastic type, including food packaging, and every material they tested leached hazardous chemical. That's why focusing scientific research on recycling is absolutely the wrong public policy approach at this time. Public science desperately needs to catch up private chemistry and prioritize the protection of the public and the environment. And that must be the priority for Canada's science and research agenda. Furthermore, governments should not be subsidizing plastic producers for recycling, which only amounts to a subsidy to continue business as usual. EPR is an approach supported by all levels of government in Canada. It is meant to ensure polluters pay the full cost of their activities, including those that have been externalized onto the environment and our health. If these producers, including those that make the plastic and those that use it in their products and packaging, believe it makes sense to invest in improved plastics recycling, they can and should do it. The government's job is to make sure these activities are safe, without undue risks to the environment or human health, and actually effective in achieving regulated requirements to address plastic pollution. Throwing government time, money, and intellectual effort at plastics recycling simply allows the businesses at the root of the plastic pollution to continue overproducing and underperforming, at least when it comes to the environment and our health. It also lends credence to the corporate greenwashing that insists recycling can get us out of this mess. Thank you.
Thank you for those opening remarks. We'll now start with our first round of questioning, and we'll kick that off with MP Tucker for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for our witness to be online. Hopefully, we will have an opportunity over the summer to spend some more time together and ask some questions about plastics. We are entering almost a 3-month shutdown of session here. And as everyone knows, I put a motion on notice a couple days back that we should sit a couple times over the summer. As Canadians are working through their summer, we should be working in a committee as well. So I will make the following motion. That the SRSR notice of motion, that Cory Tucker on Member of Parliament, Tuesday, June 11th to 2024, that given the large workload that the committee has on the docket, the committee instructs the chair to book 5 meetings between July 8th and September 13th, 2024, to deal with the unfinished business and pressing matters facing Canadians, including the study on innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics, and the study on the distribution of federal government funds among Canadian post-secondary institutions. I move that motion right now, Chair.
Okay, so we have a speaking order. So the first on the speaking order is Mr. Longfield.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Tucker for the motion. We have a witness in front of us that I would like to hear from. We have committee business scheduled for the second hour, so I would move that we adjourn debate until we're into committee business.
No committee business. This is
Point of
the
order,
second
there is
hour.
no committee business scheduled.
Right. Let's put this to the, I'll move to adjourn debate then.
Want a recorded division on that?
Yes, Chair, we'd like a point of order, or sorry, a recorded vote on this because it is, I don't think that we're asking for too much for a few meetings to be held over the summer. With all the challenges we're facing, adjourning debate on this, we should have a vote on the motion and...
No, there's no point of debating now. We're going to call it to a vote. The vote's been called.
That is on the motion to adjourn debate. We'll begin, Mr. Kellaway.
Yes.
Move to adjourn debate?
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Diab.
Oui, monsieur.
Jazik.
On the motion to adjourn debate? Yes.
Mr. Longfield.
Yes.
Mr. Chen.
Yes.
Mr. Tucker.
No.
Ms. Rempel-Garner.
No.
Mr. Lobb.
No.
Mr. Dreeshen.
No.
Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
Oui.
Mr. Cannings.
We.
That'll be 7 yeas, 4 nays.
Okay, so the motion to adjourn debate is carried.
It's defeated. It's carried. It's carried. It's carried. It's here. You're right. It's
The
carried.
motion's carried. Okay, so
It's
do I just go back to the witness? Right, so Mr. Tucker,
Point
you
here.
have 2.5 minutes left with your time.
we
for
continue with the witness.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and apologize for the witness, but this is very important, obviously, that committee works over the summer, and I'm sure the work that you do, you'll be working over the summer, and we're all trying to hopefully find a better environment for all Canadians, and some of the work that you're doing with plastics, I'm sure, would be benefited by some of the committee work that we would have done over the summer, but unfortunately, that motion did not pass. So we're only going to hear from a handful of witnesses and then break for 3 months. which is unfortunate because there should have been some time over the summer for us to debate or hear more about how we could become a superpower in recycling in Canada. And I think I'm pretty much done with my time, so I'd like to thank you for being online here today, and I'll cede my time to the next member, please.
Okay, thank you. So we will now turn to MP Jazet. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong page. Sorry. We're now turning to MP Longfield for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, and thank you to our witness for being here. I'm looking at the motion that we're studying right now, looking at innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. And in your testimony a few times, you've said that you don't think we're studying the right thing. What should we be studying briefly? And then I'd like to go back to our study. I've got some questions for you.
Well, actually, the research agenda in Canada is quite strong at the moment, I believe, on studying, in fact, microplastics from both a health and environmental point of view. We are actually collaborating on a project at the University of Waterloo looking at the Grand River watershed, for example, and trying to identify and quantify the pathways and the amounts of microplastics in that watershed. So I think actually Canada is largely on the right track. Should there be more money going to research on plastics and the impact of plastics pollution and how to avoid plastics pollution? Absolutely. But I think we're actually, in terms of funding the right types of research right now, for sure, and on human health impacts of microplastics.
Okay.
There needs to be more money, but we're on the right track.
Thank you. I'm looking at what are the solutions that we can be researching around. You mentioned the Grand River watershed, and obviously close to home for me. The University of Guelph also has the Bioproducts Discovery Center, where they're using oil from plants rather than petroleum to create plastics. They've had some really good results that they're using in automotive parts now that have lighter weight, higher strength, and lower cost. You don't usually get those three things in the same sentence. So bioplastics is something that we see a future in and that we're researching. You commented that you don't think that bioplastics is a viable solution. So what's your alternative?
Well, I think bioplastics can be a solution for the kinds of plastic products that have a social use and that we will require, especially the durable types of products you're talking about. I would caution, though, that even with bioplastics, they require all kinds of additives to make them functional. And we always have to be aware and careful about those additives because those will leach out when we're using those products and certainly when we throw them away. So,
up there because the additives that they're using a carbon black that's coming from carbon that comes from plants, and their supply chain on their plastics is not going into the petroleum supply chain. And so I'm pushing back a little bit on that one. I think science could be looking at ways of not creating microplastics by creating alternate forms using bioproducts.
Well, I think I mentioned additives. I would be very cautious about what types of additives are needed to make that plastic functional because they will likely be similar to the additives that are needed to make petroleum-based plastics functional. Secondly, those plastics will act the same way in the environment as any other petroleum-based plastic. And so this is why I say I think it's helpful if those things are used for durable products that can be collected at end of life. If we're using them for packaging, we know right now that a certain amount of packaging ends up leaked into the environment where those bioplastics will end up doing the same type of damage likely as petroleum-based plastics. And so the research on durables, we're very supportive of. We recognize, obviously, at Environmental Defense that we have to get away from reliance on oil and gas. But it's not going to be the full answer for the kind of plastic pollution that we see today.
Okay. And when I know we're really looking at the science in this committee, I sit on the Environment Committee. We've done a few studies in the last couple of years on plastics, and we've had environmental defense as part of that. And so thank you for that input as well. But really trying to keep the discussion within the science and the opportunities that science brings in terms of material science. Plastics are used because of their low cost and their ease of forming. Do you know of any other packaging solutions that are being researched that could be part of our study?
I think, as Mr. Drouin mentioned earlier, probably the biggest answer to the problem of packaging-related pollution is to get away from single-use packaging altogether. So it's less of a material question than an infrastructural system question. And, what concerns us about continuing to use plastic for packaging is the chemicals I mentioned and the propensity to create microplastics. Reuse and refill systems can be using any other type of material that exists today, but the big challenge will be probably more of a process engineering type of challenge than a material science type of challenge, I would suggest.
When I think of when I open up a package now, I'm seeing a lot of cellulose versus styrofoam. I'm seeing a lot of combined packaging where one package is being used instead of several packages. Circular Materials is a group of users of plastics that has now been formed across Canada with cross-governance. Do you see any opportunity there with researchers working with groups like Circular Materials?
Again, I think where the usefulness would be is on process engineering, trying to figure out, certainly on product design, how can we design things to be first reduced, then reused and repaired, and then recycled. So I think there would be some research. Again, though, I'm not sure this is, so much material science, but rather process engineering. And really what we're going to need to see is investment from those companies in changing the pathway of their products and really changing the value chain that they are using right now to get those products to market.
Thank you, and that's our time. Thank you very much. We'll now turn to MP Blanchard-Jocan for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our witness. My first question will be general. We're talking about management of plastics, and I know that you're fighting for an energy transition. We know Canada is the fourth biggest oil producer, and the federal government recently added a $34 billion pipeline to the mix. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. If we produce more oil, then products made with that will increase too. So we're talking about zero plastics by 2030, but our actions are leading to the opposite. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. It feels like we're in a bad dream, but this is reality. Thank you for the question. I will answer in English because it'll be quicker.
Just because it's quicker. I think we are in the process right now in Canada of kind of at a crossroads. We collectively have subsidized this pipeline that you mentioned. And we have also just collectively subsidized an increase in plastic production, notably at the Interpipeline plant in Alberta, at a Dow Chemical plant in Alberta, and at the Nova Chemicals plant in Ontario. And in our view, if we're going to get to zero plastic waste, we have to stop subsidizing pipelines and plastic production. What I believe will happen with the new pipeline is that certainly some of that heavy oil from Alberta will be shipped overseas. It will be likely shipped to China for production of plastics there that will be sent back on those container ships for products that will end up back in Canada. So I think we really do need to look at the upstream, what we call the upstream problem of plastics, which is how it is made, how much of it is made, and what we use it for. And obviously subsidizing the oil and gas industry and the pipeline industry is not going to get us in the right direction of eliminating this pollution, either greenhouse gas emissions or plastic pollution.
Merci beaucoup. Écoutez, vous avez mentionné un peu.
Thank you. Earlier, you mentioned that we have to reduce our dependency on oil and gas. Now we have a government doing the opposite, producing more oil, buying pipeline to export oil to other countries. Quebec has banned oil and gas exploration on all of its territory. So we're lucky we can transition towards something else. We're empathetic and we have solidarity with other provinces that could do a transition. But how should we explain that continuing with oil and gas runs counter to the science?
That we have to go for a real just transition away from this linear economy that is right now very much based on fossil fuel extraction and waste production. We have the means and ways to do it. Quebec is a leader in this area. There is no question in my mind that Quebec is a leader, and we should be taking lessons across the country from the kinds of transitions that Quebec is already looking at.
Merci.
Thank you. Can you make any concrete recommendations for the government to speed things up when it comes to plastic management? Earlier on, we talked about the Auditor General saying that Environment Canada can't really tell if its actions are leading to real results. So what should we do concretely to improve things?
Government needs to keep doing what it's doing. It ideally should move faster and further. There is the problem that industry is challenging federal government regulations on plastics right now. And so that does slow things down. When there are court challenges, it means that we have to stop putting our energy into improving policy to stop plastic pollution, and we have to hire lawyers and fight industry in court. This is unfortunate. But I think where the federal government is going, the leadership that they have been showing at the international level is important, and we can't stop now. This is really, we need global coordination. We need to globally see a commitments to reduce the amount of plastic that is made around the world, because even if we don't make it here, it will be made somewhere else and it will come back on our shores, either as products or waste, and eventually products. So this really does require a commitment to moving forward on this, both globally and domestically at every level of government. Am I sometimes frustrated with the pace of progress? Absolutely, I am frustrated. But as long as we keep moving forward, we keep identifying things that we don't need to use anymore as single-use plastics, we are heading in the right direction.
Merci beaucoup. Vous parlez de coordination à l'échelle internationale.
Thank you. You talk about international coordination, but there isn't even any coordination in Canada. There's one province producing oil, another one producing hydroelectricity. Now, we understand that there are different realities, different resources, but if you talk about a government and leadership, a government buying a $35 billion pipeline with taxpayers' money, do you think that shows a good example? Do you think it really encourages provinces to insist on true energy transition?
Real energy transition and a real transition for workers and communities away from a single-use society, a kind of a one-way linear economy, and really into regenerative and a just economy that we can all profit from and collectively, and that we can.
Thank you. That's our time. So now we'll turn to MP Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you to Ms. Weersig for being with us today. I thought I'd start just by, one of the themes I hear from the Conservatives here today about the plastics issue is that, it's all being properly put into landfills. We don't see plastic lying around on the streets. So, what's the problem? And I'm just wondering, I know you touched on it in your opening remarks, but if you could just for a minute go over the impacts that plastics have on Canadians directly, out of sight, out of mind. Conservatives say we don't have to worry about plastics in the ocean. It's in the ocean, it's out of our jurisdiction, and we really don't see it much. Just what are the impacts to our health and our well-being, and why we have to do this for a minute?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, there is a higher or about an equal concentration of microplastics in the Great Lakes where I live as there are in those ocean garbage patches. So it is very much right here where we live. Wherever we are making and using plastics, it is entering our environment. And certainly when we're using plastics, it is entering our bodies. The communities who live closest to production and disposal sites for waste and plastics are feeling the biggest brunt of that. But also when litter does get into the environment, and it does, about 1% of all that is made every year ends up as waste litter into the environment. That never goes away. It breaks down into smaller pieces, perhaps, but it does poison ecosystems. It affects animals. And when it's in our bodies, it is definitely having impacts on our bodies. I think this is where the research really needs to be topped up. We need to exactly figure out what those pathways and what those impacts are on our health, and figure out how we can stop making that happen.
And, you know, from what you were saying earlier as well, you feel that we have to reduce our use of plastics. That first, you know, the reduce part of the reduce, reuse, recycle. And, you know, again, one of the other conservative themes here is that the cost of living is going to go up if we cut down on plastics. I'm just wondering if you could perhaps comment on the impacts of cutting down on plastics would have on our cost of living.
Well, I think we have to really look at this as an opportunity to change the way the economy works. And this is why we talk about a circular economy. I'm not a believer in the term circular economy for plastics, because I think the circular economy is a much broader concept. But if we take reuse systems, for example, this over time we've seen in studies from around the world that it doesn't take long to recoup investment in reuse systems. Because it's actually cheaper and more effective to use packaging over and over again, wash it out, refill it, and use it over and over again for companies than it is to constantly rely on a source of virgin materials that then have to be thrown away. Sometimes those costs of throwing things away are externalized onto others, like municipalities or even communities and individuals. But we all bear the cost of that single-use society right now. And so I think if we're thinking about cost of living, there is a way of shifting. Just look at grocery companies. Grocery companies right now are wildly profitable. If they invested some of those major profits in improving environmental outcomes around single-use plastics by investing in reuse systems, that should not at all affect the cost of goods. What it should do is actually over time reduce the cost of packaging and waste management for those companies.
Well, and I'm looking at your report on Canada's Zero Plastics Packaging Waste Report Card, which is, you know, if people thought we could go down that recycling route and cut down on plastic waste, it's kind of a sobering document. We have the first conclusion on can we lower the waste gap. The answer is by 2030, the answer is fail. And all the other ones are needs drastic improvement. I'm just wondering if you could comment on that report, and aside from I think the very sensible conclusion to reduce our use of plastics, if we have to obviously use plastics while we're moving in that direction, what things do we need to do? What can the federal government do to reduce plastics waste?
Well, I think the federal government needs to move faster and more deeply on eliminating harmful and unnecessary single-use products from our lives, so we can be banning more single-use products, and then really work with every level of government to ramp up reuse systems to replace single-use. So to me, those would be the top two priorities for government policy. I think when it comes to the science and technology agenda, we really do need to get a better hold on the pathways and impacts of plastic pollution on our health. And the federal government should definitely be focusing on that so that we know ultimately when it comes to prioritizing what plastics have a social use, because I'm not somebody that says we're never going to have plastics anymore. We will probably still have plastic, but we need to decide when the benefits outweigh the cost, and we are nowhere near doing that now. And so the low-hanging fruit is obviously single-use plastics and packaging, let's start there. The government has done, I think, done a very good job of starting there. We need to go faster and further to get to the goal of zero plastic waste.
Thank you. That's your time. We'll now start the second round with MP Rempel-Garner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up on some of the questions my colleague Mr. Longfield had brought up with regard to substitute goods. It sounded like you weren't supportive of finding substitute goods for some of these products, and I'm just wondering why you would push back on looking at, especially research into substitute goods for certain types of plastics.
I guess from our point of view, the real issue is that we live right now in a throwaway society where most of our goods are not durable, are not repairable. They're not designed for reuse. They're not designed for a long life.
Okay, but
and so
just to be clear, though, I think what my colleague was asking about was looking at alternative goods for things that could be reused. Does your organization focus at all on do you have specific recommendations around what substitute goods would be acceptable?
What we're looking more at is substitute systems. So what we're looking at the moment is really.
So what I struggle with is that there's a huge policy gap here that I think Mr. Longfield was trying to get at. Is we have organizations like yourself come in and tell people, well, you can't have any plastics and we want to ban. And then as a public policy maker, I get letters into my constituency office about people having to get their French fries in their hands at a drive-through. So shouldn't we be looking at transitional products as opposed to just jumping into a ban doesn't that make sense to you?
Well, we have replacements for single-use plastics today. What we're hoping is that we don't end up in another single-use
let's talk about that
product.
What
we'd really like to end up with is a reuse system, so that when you get your fries at a takeout, you get your fries in a container that can be returned, washed out, and given out again. So that's why I say it's a systems level. I think what Mr. Longfield was talking about was more durable products, and we're not opposed to research on the kinds of things that will need to go into those durable products, but we need to make sure that those products are safe, that they're designed to be repaired, they're designed to be disassembled so that each component can be recycled afterwards.
Thank you. So the problem, though, is that getting to these, and I don't disagree, at some point, it's very laudable. We want to get to this circular system that you're talking about. The problem is we've now enacted bans without having those systems or the products in place. So people are getting their French fries in their hands, which is problematic. We're also banning potential transitional products like the Calgary Co-op compostable bag, for example. So don't you find it problematic that we're missing a step and that the public now sees this single-use plastic ban as highly problematic and that there's not a lot of public buy-in for it? Why isn't your group addressing the reality of public policies? Yes, we want to get to this transition, but we need those transitional products right now. McDonald's is not going to wash out a plastic French fry cup right now. They're just not. So how do we How do we get to that point?
McDonald's is doing that.
At every McDonald's across Canada, somebody who is a single mom who's going through the drive-through and just needs some French fries for their kids is going to get a reusable French fry cup that's going to be washed out for her without any additional cost.
McDonald's could be doing that. They're doing it.
They could be doing it. Okay, now we're making products. So now we're making progress. But you do agree that transitional step is expensive to the public, right? So what should the committee be recommending to the government so that the single mom with the screaming kids in the back doesn't have to get the French fries in her hands?
Yeah, I've not heard of this problem. I think French fries are often given out in paper. That's not.
I think that's the gap here. I think that's the gap is that when people have to pay $2 to Loblaws for a reusable bag that is essentially a tax on their groceries and has 1 million times more products or plastic than anything else, and then there's a mound of them under everybody's sink across the country. It's because groups like yourself have not recommended that transitional process. It's always just ban. Now, I'm not saying that we don't want to get to a point where we have more like everything that you've talked about. But we need to, wouldn't you recommend that as a committee, we should be looking at that transitional step so that we can get buy-in again?
We have always recommended that the real alternative to single-use plastics is reuse systems that need to be scaled up, and the federal government and all the provincial governments have a role to play. At the moment, not a single.
You've also advocated for bans without having that in place, so we've lost the public, and the public can't afford this right now. So how do we get back to sanity and start with, okay, if we want to get to ban, how do we do the transition first?
Okay, so that's our time.
Oh, sorry, I just want to say I don't believe we've lost the public on this. I believe the public still supports the action on plastic pollution and is finding other ways to deal with single-use plastics to replace them.
Thank you. We'll now turn to MP Shen for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Wersick. Just to continue on this whole conversation about holding French fries in the hands, then going through McDonald's drive-thrus, you did mention in your testimony that it doesn't take long for industry to recoup investment into reuse systems. So my understanding is that people aren't necessarily holding the fries in their hands. They're being put in biodegradable packaging, such as paper packaging, that of course is still considered single use. However, a step forward from plastic single-use packaging. So do you have an example that you could share of a success story where perhaps in the restaurant industry where investments have been made in a reuse system that has enabled the industry or that particular business, for example, to address the environmental concerns and at the same time recoup their investment?
Yes, thank you for the question. There is a study from Upstream, which is a reuse advocacy organization in the United States that has exactly looked at this question of restaurants replacing single-use products with reusables and how quickly it took them to recoup their costs. For individual restaurants, they often already have a dishwasher because they already have certain reusable dishes in their kitchen that they need to wash. And so there's often very little additional cost involved at all in switching to reusables. Other restaurants, it does require some retooling of the way they run their business, and so it takes a little longer. But I'm happy to share that study afterwards about how businesses have recouped their investments in reuse. Now we're hoping to look more carefully at grocery stores to ensure that this can also be done for other types of products as opposed to just restaurant products.
That's fantastic to hear, and would certainly appreciate getting more information about that. It really shows that it can be done, it is being done, and hopefully can be scaled up, and that industry and governments can recognize the importance of those investments in reuse systems that will ultimately have a very positive impact on the environment. You also touched on plastics being very problematic. Once they're in the environment, they never go away. And you've mentioned the concern around the impact on human health. The impact is also, as you mentioned, very is notable on the ecosystems, on marine wildlife, on our soil, our groundwater, our rivers and oceans. Could you speak to some of the impacts on biodiversity and wildlife that these plastics are making?
Sure, yes. I mean, the federal government did produce a science assessment before proceeding with listing plastics as a toxic, plastic manufactured items as a toxic substance on Schedule 1 of SEPA. And that assessment really looked at all of the various ways in which both microplastics and plastics are impacting the environment and wildlife in particular. That's where the science is strongest at the moment. The evidence of animals strangling on plastic or basically feeding themselves on plastics and starving them of real nutrients. So these are some examples of how macroplastics have affected and killed or maimed wildlife. Microplastics, the research is evolving every day, but already the federal government science assessment found that there is evidence that microplastics can change the gene expression of small aquatic organisms. And that means that we're changing life in our food webs and in our ecosystems. Plastics are actually effectively changing ways of life in those small organisms. And there's no reason to believe that that will not, does not impact other organisms, including larger ones and mammals, although that research is still being done. But these are two examples in the science assessment that are there. More recently, microplastics were found in people who have suffered heart attacks in their arteries. There are microplastics in their plaque, and people that had more microplastics had worse outcomes from their heart disease. These are very concerning. Is there an entire 100% cause and effect out of that study yet that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine? No, there is not. But this is where we need a little bit more research. But I would say we just now need to really proceed with caution. We know that the damage is happening. We know the prevalence of plastic. This is why we're really urging the focus to be on how we can reduce plastic at its source, how we can make sure that our products and packaging are reused and repaired as much as possible to stop this loading on our environment and on our bodies of all of this plastic.
We will now turn to Jean-Claude for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je poursuis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to understand in concrete terms what the federal government can do to try to convince industry to accept the changes, because right now there are multinationals that seem to believe that they're above the law and that federal interests don't count. So there are other countries that have actually put into effect concrete solutions. I'd like to know what you think the federal government should do. The train is almost leaving the station.
Hoping that the government wins the appeal of the case against the listing of plastic manufactured items as toxic under CEPA. That appeal is scheduled to be heard next week. So that's one thing they need to do and really do it well and win. And then stay the course and really work with international partners in coordination. I would say Canada is not the only one that has run into roadblocks from the chemical industry. There are examples of court cases in other countries. There was one in Mexico to try to stop refill of beverage containers, if I'm not mistaken. There are other challenges around the world. I think we just need to be persevering, and we need to recognize that public health and environmental health and public interest need to come ahead of profits in this case, because we can't have both an extremely strong plastics industry and a safe environment. That has not proven to be the case in the last 20 years. And as the amount of plastics has been increasing in the world, and profits are going up in that industry, it is not conducive with the future of the planet and the future of our health. So we really do need to take a look at that, and the government needs to take that seriously and maybe certainly stop subsidizing plastic production and stop subsidizing pipelines. Fully agree with you there, and really focus on environmental protection.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now turn to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, and I just want to wrap up by talking about the plastics treaty process that we're on a global scale. We had meetings here in Ottawa recently, and the plans are to have a finalized treaty done by the end of this year, with another meeting in South Korea. Just wondering if you could comment on, first of all, where you think let's put it this way, what you would like to see that treaty look like, where global cooperation should bring us, and what your concerns may be about if we come up with a very watered-down treaty that just left everything to be voluntary and, let's do more waste management. Just where you think it's going and where it should be going.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with where it should be going. I think it's clear from all the environmentalists that are involved in that treaty process as observers that and some of the member states as well, it's very clear we need a global legally binding treaty with measures on that limit the production of plastics worldwide, limit trade in plastics in favor of other types of trade practices that are supportive of healthy economies. And we need to really, that would include bans on the most problematic products. Canada has started with bans on the most problematic chemical additives in plastics as well. And really a scientific committee that can help lead us through development of measures over time as we get more information and as our economy hopefully shifts away from the linear throwaway society that we have today. What we have right now is a bit of a roadblock with a small group of countries that are seem highly connected to industry, whether it be their own national industries or private industry led, I think, largely by multinationals out of the United States that are also present in Canada that are really trying to block efforts for international cooperation on plastics. And so I think to get over that hump, we need to think about what we've done before in Canada, which was host a Montreal Protocol that did manage to phase out ozone depleting substances. We need to, and it didn't start with all the countries signing on. It started with the committed countries signing on, and it built over time, and people saw the wisdom in it. The other countries saw the wisdom in it, and we did manage to phase out those chemicals. We need to do the same for plastics. Keep our eye on the prize, sign a treaty with the countries that are most committed to it, work with science and Indigenous leaders to figure out a way through that is fair to everyone and that follows evidence, and get to international cooperation that ensures that our planet will be healthy for generations to come.
Thank you very much for that. So I think we have time, like we did on the previous panel, for final two questions of 2.5 minutes. So we'll start that with MP Lobb.
Very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our witness here for the last panel of the day. And my first question is the comment you'd made about a throwaway society or throwaway consumption, and it's actually a term I've used before too. What role do you think that the Walmarts and the Canadian Tires, and I'm not just picking on those ones, that's the one that comes to mind, Amazons and all them, what role do they have in this plastic mess that's out there? And I'm not against plastic. I understand it has a role and it makes sense in some cases, but they have a big role in this whole thing, don't you think?
I very much agree with you. Thanks for the question. Their big retailers are very much peddling a lot of single-use, throwaway packaging and even products, and they are at the heart of a supply chain. They take those products from manufacturers and they get them to us. And so they're key in this. They're the ones that we know and see every day, and their practices, they should be doing much more to eliminate single-use plastics from their own supply chains and really helping get us to reverse logistics so that we can get things back to them. Those things can be repaired, cleaned, reused, put back on the market. We really believe that retailers will play a very big role in that, and they need to come to the table ready to do more than just pretend to recycle their plastics.
One other thing, and anybody that's recently had young children, grandparents, parents, what have you, they know what I'm talking about when I say this. After your kids reach a certain age and they no longer play with all their plastic toys, you wonder what the hell you're going to do with all these things. What is it like? What are people supposed to do with all these toys that kids have that are, nobody wants them? They're a single-use toy, really, is what they are. Most of these toys. What are people supposed to do with those things right now?
Well, unfortunately, those are largely landfilled. I think that is the big problem. There are lots of groups now looking at sharing so that not everybody has to buy. Every time you have a kid, everybody has to buy their own fleet of toys or clothing, because clothing is another big source of plastic pollution. The idea of sharing so that my child for this stage of development likes these toys and needs these clothing. I'm going to use them, make sure these products are durable, can be washed and sanitized and passed on to somebody else. I think we do need systems for that kind of reuse repair. And we don't have that today. There are some Facebook groups, for example, where that can happen, or other types of community bulletin boards where some of this sharing happens. But a toy library, for example, would be a fantastic thing in a community where people can share toys, like they share tools sometimes today, or we share books.
Thank you. And I believe they do have that in Toronto. So there you go. Go Toronto. So we're going to ask MP Callaway to bring it home for us for 2.5 minutes.
Okay, there you go. Bringing it home to the conclusion of the committee. So a lot of great questions posed to you over the last hour, and thank you, by the way, being the only witness and taking questions without a break it's a challenging feat, and thank you for your answers. So again, we are going to at some point have a report. Thank you, Lloyd. At some point, we're going to have a report. Let's just say in the future, you're going to open up the report. What are 3 recommendations that you would like to see in that report?
I would say focus of science on microplastics and human health and plastics additives and human health. I think that for a science and research agenda, that really does need to be underscored. Working through NSERC and SHRC. Support the development of an independent science and Indigenous knowledge panel globally that can help basically steer the implementation of a global plastics treaty that is evidence-based and addresses the needs of global cooperation in science. And really urge on the policy front to focus on systems redesign as opposed to material redesign. Although I do understand that some material redesign will be important, I think our bigger problems today, the priority really does need to be on systems redesign.
I think I have just a few more seconds left here, but minute? Okay. So you talked about what you would like to see in the report. What wouldn't you want to see in the report?
Well, I think what I hope is that the report doesn't reflect that there's some way that plastics recycling research, if we just are slightly more innovative or much more innovative on plastics recycling, we can solve the plastic pollution problem. And I really hope that that is not a conclusion that gets drawn in this study, because history has shown and that this is not a good use of our time and effort at this time.
Thanks very much. Hopefully I brought it home.
Yes.
Whatever that means, but I brought it home, and away we go. And I used some common sense there. So I think we all learned.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Ms. Wierzyk, for your expert testimony. I'm glad we were able to persevere and get your sound issues sorted out. So if you have additional comments that you wanted to make, you feel free to submit them through the clerk. We would welcome them. I see people packing up. I just wanted to remind the committee that we're going to need to plan for our next study. And the practice of this committee would mean that in the order, after the plastic study, would be NDP, the Bloc, the Liberals, and the CPC. So if you could give some thought over the summer, because we don't have anything lined up in the queue after this study. And I want to thank you all for working cooperatively. I so much appreciate how this committee has functioned. And I wish you all a happy, busy summer back home with the people that have elected us to serve them. So thank you very much. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Sure. Okay, so be it.